Hello everyone, thank you for having a stop at our presentation. My name is Vilà-Giménez and through this 5-minute video presentation I will give you a brief summary of a study in collaboration with Dr. Demir-Lira and with Dr. Prieto, which is entitled Referential Iconic versus Non-referential beat gestures performed in children's narratives, the predictive value of iconic gestures. So you already probably know that gesturing is a powerful tool across language learning and development, and that children's gestures are related to children's more complex linguistic skills. That is, when children start acquiring more complex language skills such as narrative abilities, they also start to perform more complex gestures. But what is gesture contribution to later stages in development? Could gesture performance in narratives, for example, predict later oral narrative abilities? In our study, we focused on referential iconic gestures and on another less studied type of gesture, non-referential beat gesture. So previous developmental work has shown evidence that children produce referential iconics in their narratives at around 4 and 5 years of age, whereas non-referential beat gestures are documented to appear later in complex discourses, at around 5 and 6 years to even 10 years of age. Previous work has shown the relevance of referential iconic gestures, specifically of the character viewpoint gestures, in which the gesturer takes on the role of the character, in building up children's narrative skills. And most importantly, these character viewpoint gestures have been demonstrated to help scaffold oncoming changes in narratives. And what do we know about non-referential beat gestures? So these gestures have also been shown to contribute to children's narratives, for example, by asking children to observe and encouraging them to produce non-referential beat gestures in a short narrative training task. And crucially, non-referential beat gestures, specifically those produced during parent-child interactions, can signal changes in narratives. And why do we focus on later narrative abilities? So it is important to mention that narrative abilities are a powerful measure and a strong predictor of children's long-term language abilities, specifically of their communicative competence and thus of a school literacy success. So the present study intends to address the predictive value of gestures in children's narrative development by comparing the effects of referential iconics, not only character viewpoint gestures and non-referential beat gestures, produced in narrative corpora. So the research question of our study is whether referential iconic and/or non-referential beat gestures performed by 5 to 6-year-old children in their narratives can signal changes in later narrative performance 2 years later. So participants of our study were 83 children. All of them were recorded at 2 time points, at time 1 when they were 5 to 6 years of age, and at time 2 when they were 7 to 9 years of age. A narrative retelling task was administered to all participants with 2 wordless cartoons, randomly selected from this set of 4 cartoons. Children watched and told the same 2 stories both times. A stepwise regression analysis showed that referential iconic gestures, as opposed to non-referential beat gestures performed in children's narratives at time 1, were significant predictors of better structured narratives 2 years later, at time 2. So the main conclusion of our study is that referential iconic gestures that accompany narratives produced by 5 to 6-year-old children were predictors of better structured narratives at later ages, when children were 7 to 9 years of age. Whereas we did not find the same results for non-referential beat gestures. Importantly, we think that these findings can complement other studies which found that character viewpoint gestures predict better goal-structured narratives later on, and that those beat gestures produced during naturalistic interactions predict later narrative productions. Our findings can have an impact on our understanding of the interaction of speech and gesture in children's gesture and narrative development, as well as practical implications for teaching methodologies. So it is very important to say that embodied narrative retellings using body movements contribute to narrative development, and thus, in general, this can motivate the potential beneficial role of embodied storytelling in cognitive and linguistic processing. So the take-home message of our study is that using gestures in narratives has an important beneficial role for later complex linguistic outcomes, such as narrative abilities. If you would like to know more about our study, please check the additional materials. Thank you very much for your attention, and we will be very happy to answer any question you may have.